So can we start? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's break a leg. So let's start. All right. So good evening, everyone, and welcome to the 9th edition of Metaphor, the Lucknow Literature Festival. I'm Meenakshi, and today we are talking about women scriptwriters of India and their foray into Bollywood, which was largely a male domain earlier. There has been a great underrepresentation of women writers in Bollywood, and it's a much known fact, like several other fields. The world of stories has also been populated predominantly by men. But then let's also consider the fact that, like any other field, screenwriting is being assailed, claimed, and conquered by women. And today, I have the pleasure of having with me two such amazing ladies who have made their mark in the field. I welcome, on behalf of Metaphor, Ms. Advaita Kala and Ms. Parinda Joshi. And let me quickly tell you a little bit about them. So, our first lovely lady, Advaita Kala, is an Indian author, screenwriter, and columnist. She has written screenplays for films such as the romantic drama Anjana Anjani and the thriller Kahani. Apart from writing for films, she has written two novels, Almost Single and Almost There. And she is now a contributing editor at India Ahead. The film Kahani, as a lot of us know about it, proved to be a great success and garnered several awards and nominations. Advaita won the Screen Award for Best Story, Star Guilds Award for Best Story, and Zee Cine Awards for Best Story. Apart from writing for films and novels, she has also written the television serial Airplane, which was aired on Star Plus. She writes a regular hospitality column for the Financial Express called Epicuriosity, and has regular columns in the Financial Chronicle, Yahoo, and Dainik Jagran, and that's quite a bit. She also writes a regular column for the Dhaka Tribune. And last but not the least, during the COVID-19 outbreak in India, she has been running a community kitchen by the name of Janta Rasoi in Gurugram. So that was Advaita for you. And now for our next lovely lady, Parinda. And Parinda Joshi, as we know, is a best-selling novelist and also, again, a screenplay writer. Born and raised in Ahmedabad, she now lives in San Francisco, where she oversees growth operations for a startup in the fashion industry. She has published 4 novels to her credit: Live from London, Power Play, Made in China, and has recently released A House Full of Men, published by HarperCollins, which actually made it to the list of the best fiction of 2021 by GQ. Her third novel, Made in China, was adapted into a feature film by Maddox Films, starring Rajkumar Rao and Boman Irani, for which she co-wrote the screenplay. A new book, A House Full of Men, is a drama about a dysfunctional family, and we'll talk more about it with her, with multiple romances woven. And to quote her, love is complicated, messy, glorious, says author Parinda Joshi, and she deals with its many nuances in her book. So let me not keep you waiting anymore, and let's start with our questions. And welcome, ladies, again. So Advaita, the first one for you. You have said that book writing, like script writing, is a lonely process. And it becomes fun and collaborative once others get involved. So please share your experiences as a scriptwriter for Kahani, which was such an amazing story. Vidya Balan as Vidya Bagchi, as you know, she was referred to in the movie Akka, Vidya Bagchi. She was a show stealer. So what did it take to think about, such a character? Please.
Oh, yeah. Did I actually say it's fun and collaborative? My God, I must have been talking up in a different era because it's the luck of the draw who you end up with as collaborators, and not every experience is fun. Let me put that out there. I must have been very naive and young. That's an old interview. If you ask me that question today, my revised and more mature and experienced self would say that it just depends entirely. It is definitely a collaborative process when you work on film or screenplays for web series or TV or any of the formats that I've done so far. So it does get collaborative. There are many different voices, there are many different aesthetics, sensibilities, because there are different perspectives and POVs that you bring to a particular story and its representation. Not to mention that the director is the ultimate storyteller, because he's the one who actually has your material and goes on sets and directs and gets the actors to emote and all of those things. So there is a sense of loss of control when you write for film or for web or TV, because at the end of the day, you have to hand over the material to somebody else and hope they're good translators. And that's really when it gets a little complicated. In a book, it's of course different, because it's you all the way. And then if you have a good working relationship like I did with my editor, then you're able to, kind of work with them as a team, really, and collaborate on the book. And what comes out in print is very near what you imagined or what you wrote or what you thought it would be. But in film, there's no such guarantee. So, I've had situations where I've written a night scene of very intense conversation and drinking. And because it was too cold and it was New York, it was converted into a day scene with very intense conversation and drinking. And it just didn't work because, night offers a certain ambience, a certain sense of the moment, which encourages intimate conversation and confessionals and things like that, but not daytime, noon, and under a bridge. That just doesn't work. So these are the kind of ups and downs that take place when you work on film or any kind of visual medium. And yeah, so it can be fun. My last experience, which was on a web series that's releasing later this year, Illegal Season 2, that was fantastic. I had a great team of co-writers, dialogue writer, junior writer, legal writer. So we had a good team, and we had a great showrunner. So that went really well, and I'd love to repeat that experience. But not every experience is one that you want to repeat.
I can totally relate to that. In fact, to quote Mr. Ishad Kamil, he was with us in one of our literary festivals, and he was talking about a famous song of his, Tinka Tinka, and how it got changed by the singer who was singing. One of the words got totally changed. And he said, I had never written that word. And I guess that happens all the time. So it's like you give your baby and it's dressed up differently. So yeah. That feeling of loss is there. So thank you for that answer. And Parinda, coming to you, your mantra, they say, has been best described by Maya Angelou's quote. And that says, my mission in life is not merely to survive, but to thrive, and to do so with some passion, some compassion, some humor, and some style. So that's definitely some quote. Please elaborate.
Yeah, definitely. So I echo with what Advaita said, and I'll come back to that in a bit. But as for the quote, I feel I have a huge appetite for entertainment. I'm a voracious reader, and I'm always looking for entertainment in various forms of things, whether it's reading, it's consuming content, whatever. So I'm so thrilled that I've been able to find and incorporate writing into my life, just to get away from the daily drudgeries of life. It's my love, it's my passion, it's my escape. And at the end of the day, when I'm unwinding, and I'm down to thinking about my next piece of work, it's just it's very liberating, and it's exciting, and I'm so glad I've been able to incorporate that passion in my life. Compassion is something I'm working on always, and I think COVID has given us a new perspective on that. As for fashion, I've always been a fashion lover, and I'm thrilled that I've been able to find my way into a fashion startup where I get to live and breathe it every day. And that allows me a little bit of style. The style is not just something that you wear, but it's also reflected in your attitude, in your perspective, in just your worldview. And so I feel like those are the things I really live by, or I try to live by at least.
Wonderful. And let's get to know you more in the upcoming questions. So the next question is for both you ladies, Parinda and Advaita. Both of you had a conventional childhood, I believe, and growing up in different cities of India. So what made you delve into writing, and what was the reaction of your families and friends? Also, did your growing up years inspire you in some way? Sometimes we have somebody whom we looked up to, some elder or somebody, some author who inspired us to become what you are today. So please share.
Yeah,
Both of
I can
you.
go first. Sure, I can go first. So I think I realized that I have a strong love for the written word around middle school sometime, but even before that, as a child, I wasn't particularly, it's a controversial statement, but I wasn't particularly married to truths. Events as they were just boring to me. So with our friends and family, when I narrate events and non-events to them, I'd always add a ton of spices. And I realized I was doing it when my father started warning people to apply a reduction factor, a major reduction factor to everything I was saying. Because he's like, my kid tends to dramatize a lot. And that's when I realized that I had a knack for storytelling. It's something I inherited from him because he had it too. So I think that's when I felt powerful when I could do that, right?
That's really interesting. That knack of storytelling always be inherent, as we say.
Yeah. Yeah. So I thought I was just diving on, dramatized versions of everything. And then around middle school, mine wasn't a childhood where we grew up watching a lot of movies. In fact, I watched Sholay in my 20s after I moved to the US, but we did read a lot. And so, reading did have an impact on me. And I'd spend hours with the dictionary looking for new words. I had a lot of pen pals or friends who'd moved away to other countries, and I'd write to them. And those letters were my playground for, experimenting with the language. And there was a very strong affinity towards that. But growing up in the environment where I was, there weren't any role models. I didn't know any writers particularly, and I didn't know if there was a certain path I could follow to becoming a writer. So I just did the tried and tested, computer science route, etc. But that latent desire for writing always remained with me. And then as I grew up, I took to blogging, and then I worked in the entertainment industry in LA, where I was privy to a lot of behind the scenes stories about musicians. And so I worked for a concert promoter firm. And so every other night I'd go to a concert and be behind in the green room with a lot of the big names you'd have heard of. Or sports stars. And so those stories started taking form. I started, keeping a track of it. And then when an opportunity presented itself, I wrote my first novel, which was Live from London, which was about a young musician against the British music industry. And then there was no stopping me thereafter. So it's kind of how that came about.
That was some insight into your childhood. And Adwaita, can we have your version, please?
Sure. I went to boarding school in Dehradun, and I was very young. I was in, I think, grade 4. And my mother went to drop me off, and I recall going that moment when if you've been to boarding school, the moment when your parent leaves you there and walks out of the gate is a parting which is sort of hard to describe, but is extremely strongly felt, even as a child, even when you're not able to articulate exactly what's happening to you. And when you're 7.5, 8, you're anyway rather young. So I remember that it's such a stark memory that my mother was leaving, and I looked nervous, and she said, don't worry, you'll never be lonely here. And I said, why is that? And we're standing out in the courtyard. And as you know, Dehradun is surrounded by the mountains. It's a valley. Yeah. And you can see the Mussoorie Hills. So she pointed to the Mussoorie Hills and she says, Ruskin Bond lives there, so you'll never be lonely. And it's amazing. Many years later, I spent a lot of time in Landor, where he lives, because it's a lovely place to write. I met him and I've gotten to know him. and I told him this story, and then there was this Australian writer called Ken Spillman who was there with me when I met Ruskin, and I told him, this is the story, and he wrote a book about it, about how this little girl grew up to be a writer. It's called Adwaita, and it's published by Tulika Press. So if you have a little girl who wants to be a writer, it's written by Ken Spillman. A lovely book. And it was just about my, Ruskin and the impact that he had on me as a young child. And just knowing that he was in those mountains, somewhere in those mountains, made me feel safer and more secure. And I think very early on in my life, I knew books, writers, words were friends and were a sanctuary of sorts. And that's been my sort of first experience. I've
Wow.
always written.
Story at
Always
that time.
written. Coming back to the writing question, I've always written. I always say it's more who I am as opposed to what I do, because I've been doing it forever. I never ever thought I could be a novelist. And in our society, you know, if you want to pursue a creative line, that your parents sort of say, how are you going to earn a living? And I must say that there's nothing romantic about being a starving artist at all. It's only romantic. And now I've been a full-time writer for about 10 years, and you have your peaks and troughs, you know. You have the times when things are great, and then you have the times when you have to say, okay, maybe I need to cut back on this and cut back on that. But I think the most beautiful thing about writing full time, and for writing for as long as I have, is that you're a mistress of your own time, and that's a great luxury.
Definitely, you totally agree with that. And that was such a precious memory that you shared. I mean, so many children would be thinking like that, maybe in some different ways, but that was really precious. And I have to look up that book.
I mean, he's India's answer to Santa Claus. You know, you see him at Oxford Bookstore in
Well said.
Cambridge Bookstore in Missouri on Mall Road, and there are kids who are lined up, who are waiting to get their books signed. He's there every Saturday at 4 p.m. Whoever's going to Missouri next. So.
No, I've had great memories of Mussoorie and Dehradun, so I can totally relate to that. Coming back to your question, Adwaita, the question's for you. Can you share with us what inspired your first novel? Almost Single, that's what it was called, I believe. And the famous quote that was attributed to it, "The hunt is not a male fiefdom." I mean, that's something. So I would really love to hear you about that.
Well, I think it was just my own preoccupation. I wrote it when I was quite young. You know, I'm one of those writers who was published like before I was 30, that sort of situation. So, you know, I was in that phase where your preoccupation is about marriage, and everybody around you is getting married, and everybody's finding the one. And I'm still single, by the way, so you know how that worked out. But at that point of time, you know, there was this huge preoccupation with marriage, you know, and how you know, in our society, you're told that, you know, marriage is what completes you, it's what you must do, it's what everybody does, and it's a rite of passage for a woman in particular. And I just wasn't feeling it with that intensity, you know. I wasn't feeling the marriage thing. I was sure I wanted the romance and the flirtation and the dates and the pursuit and all of that, of course. But the marriage thing, that compulsion that, you know, society places on you, was something that I didn't feel. But I saw it all around me. My friends, I had friends who were totally depressed at not being married by a certain age. You know, who were hitting at that time, there was no Tinder, but there was Shaadi.com. So they were on Shaadi.com and they were trying to figure life out. And Almost Single came from that sort of desperation. And I use desperation because I think it's the most authentic way to describe it. You know, without dressing it up in some sort of Sex and the City cool. No, it's a phase of desperation. It's a point of crisis wherein you identify and you assess your own life and your successes based on societal norms and pressures. And it's a terrible experience. So when it can be terrible, but I wanted to have fun with it. So Almost Single really came from the perspective of saying, I'm going to have a big old laugh about this because I'm plagued by it. I know you are. And let's all just laugh together. So it came from wanting people to laugh and having a laugh myself. So I always say that Almost Single was a great friend to me while I was writing it. And it was a great friend to people who read it subsequently. I mean, it went on to sell over 250,000 copies, got picked up by Bantam in the US. And had a busy print run, and the independent newspaper, I remember, called it Bridget Jones in a Sari. So it had
I've heard of that one.
It had its moment and it traveled. And the best compliment I got was a lady said that she took it into the labor room with her. And she read it all the way till she had the child. So I was like, yay.
That was some tribute to you,
Yes.
right?
Social good.
That was some real
Laugh.
tribute.
Yeah.
Yeah, actually, the pressure is killing. I mean, I remember on the other side, the parents' side, I'll tell you my side of the story,
Yeah.
just a short one. So, my father told me once I'd selected whom I want to marry, that good you selected somebody. I did not want to go through the same pain I went for your sister. So, he was very happy and relieved. So, I guess it's all around us, and it's really difficult.
I know. I mean, I have a younger sister who got married before me, and and my mom came to me. She's like, "Are you okay with it?" I said, "For heaven's sake, we're not in a Hindi film. It's fine." And at the wedding, it was really funny because this makes me laugh. But people are actually like, they would come and like congratulate her, and then like come and commiserate with me. Like, "Oh, okay, it'll happen for you." And they actually felt like, congratulate, commiserate, congratulate, commiserate.
I felt obligated to do it, right?
Like they assumed I was feeling horrible, but I wasn't actually. I don't think like I am cut out for marriage. So
It's just that single yardstick that the society has, right? For
yeah, exactly.
happiness, right? But to determine if she's happy or not.
And marriage is work, and it's a lot of work, and it's not work that everybody is cut out for. And as a creative person, I feel my work anyway consumes me emotionally and mentally. That it's just easier for me this way.
Right. So let's get on with our stories. And so, Parinda, can you share about your journey as an author from Life from London to A House Full of Men? And when you heard that Made in China was being adapted into a movie, I mean, what was your reaction to it? And can you share some interesting anecdotes or something that went around that time?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
so, Life from London, I'm not a trained novelist. I wasn't at the time, at least, right? When my kid was born, I was on mat leave for 4 months, and my God bless her heart, she slept a lot and had all this time in the world, and had a lot of stories. Because, like I said, I used to be backstage with everyone from Britney Spears to Justin Bieber to Shakira, and I heard a lot of stories. So I put that thing together, the novel together, in about 4 months, at least the first draft, and then I continued working on it. And I liked the sound of it. It was straight from the heart. It didn't probably check off every attribute on the how to write a great novel list, but it was something that I liked at the time. I enjoyed it. And I was so far removed from the Indian publishing scene. I didn't know anybody. There were no lit agents that I knew. So I just, one fine day when I was done or satisfied with it, I went online and found the top 10 publishing houses in India, looked up the query letter formats, and sent it to them, just like, cold calling. And one day, in a brown fata hua envelope, the contract came, right? No phone call, no email, nothing. That's how publishing houses, or some of them at least, used to work back in the day. And I was, jumping with delight. I couldn't believe it. But that was the first, and then it was, coming of age story about a young Indian musician against the backdrop of the British music industry. It resonated quite a bit with a lot of young people. I think and then I've written across genres. So I worked in sports as well, and I had a lot of stories there. And so then I jumped to my next novel, which was Power Play, which was about behind this scenes acquisition story of a fictional IPL team. It was a corporate drama and romance. I started teaching myself a lot. I enrolled myself in various online classes, learned the craft of novel writing. I used to go to a bunch of writers groups and interact with a lot of them in LA, and it was a super enriching experience. Just tapping into people's heads and seeing what they're doing and their feedback on your process, etc. And really, helps you grow as a writer. So I did all of that, taught myself a lot. Power Play was my second. Then I went on to write Made in China, which was a dark comedy about a quirky take on an Indian businessman who goes to China and gets lost in the back alleys of Beijing, where black market trade is rampant. And that was based on a newspaper article I'd read. And I'm from Gujarat, I'm Ahmedabadi. So those, Gujarati wacky entrepreneurial stories are all around me. When I showed that to publishers, the reaction wasn't all that positive. They're like, "Oh, is pretty dark. You're a young woman, you should be focusing on romance, etc. So I kind of put it on the back burner until it caught the eye of director who'd read about me in the papers, and I narrated it to him in a line, and he seemed to like the idea. So um, he picked it up, and then I spent a year. This was my very first foray into screenwriting, so I spent a year along with him translating the book as is into the screenplay. And then it got picked up by Madoc. And then, of course, it took, as I was saying early on, it took a life of its own. It was mounted large. Several other writers, dialogue writers came on board. So it just became a really big crew. And of course, it deviated from what the core of. So the heart of the book and the movie is the same, but then the movie is very different. Multiple subplots and characters and themes were added. Popular Bollywood subtext was added. Dialogues are something that's very notably different. And I understand, right? But when you're young and naive, you don't know these things. You think your book and the movie are going to look the exact same. And I think there's examples you've seen of all kinds of things, right? The movies that are similar to the books that they were based on, and movies are very different to the books they're based on. And I think it's just whatever is the vision of the production house and the director is how it ends up shaping, for better or for worse. But it was a delightful experience. It was very enriching. I was really far removed from Bollywood. So one moment, like I said, I didn't even grew up watching many. So at one moment I'm in LA, watching these stars on TV. The next moment I'm in Bombay with a bunch of them, with Rajkumar and Moni and Baman, in their vanity vans talking about scenes and characters. And there's a lot of waiting around on the sets, as I would know. So in the free time, just catching up on art and literature and what roles they liked. And when is Tesla coming to India? And I found them to be immensely approachable, very down to earth. It's not the assumption that I had, the perception you have of these stars, just eminently relatable people. And it was surreal. I still can't believe it that it got picked up and made it this far. So all in all, really fun experience. I remember you asked for a story. I remember I was on this set and my mom had visited me in Bombay, and I was chatting with Rajkumar Rao, and then my mom just showed up and he's like, "Who's that?" And I said, "It's my mom." And he just dived at her feet to seek blessings. I'm like, "Okay, whoa, that's a big star. That's my mom who's just come and he's taking blessings," right? And even I don't do that. I've never dived at my mom's feet to seek blessings. And it was just a very endearing thing to watch, right? There's a certain perception about Bollywood stars, and when you see them so up close and personal, and you see their authentic selves, it was a beautiful experience.
Definitely, that's the human factor that we call, and that's what makes people who they are, I believe. So that was wonderful. Thank you, Farinda. So right, and so Adwaita, now coming to you. While we were discussing this interview, I remember you telling me about how difficult it was for script writers to get paid in Bollywood. Unlike, as authors, I mean, we just get royalty. But as script writers for Bollywood, it's difficult to extract your payment and to get paid what you're due for. So can you share your experience and anything that you would share with our audience about it?
Well, now since I work across formats, I'll tell you, those royalty statements that we take for granted, like you have to be really sure your publisher is giving you the right sales figures, because that's what your royalty is based on. And you don't know, what number is actually selling. You just have to believe what they tell you. If they tell you 10,000 copies, it's 10,000 copies. If they say 20, it's 20. So, there is an opacity in the world of publishing as well. I think with digital publishing, that's reduced to a certain extent, because now ebook sales can be tracked far more openly and, transparently. So that's with the book side of it. Yes, with film, it is extremely, as you gain experience and, you become more of a name, so to speak, then yes, you do get paid on time, and you get paid what you deserve. I think what has happened in the last 10 years or so in Bollywood has been a certain corporatization of the entire system, which has improved this. However, it's still a chase. So I always tell people who want to work in films, writers specifically, I always say, try and find an agent. There are many agencies now in the industry. They take their commission, which they earn, and they sort out a lot of the headache for you. Because I think Parinda will tell you this, as a writer, we're very bad with negotiating money. I mean, she runs a business, so and she's from Ahmedabad, so this may not apply to her. But for me, I mean, I'm the worst when it comes to negotiations about money and how much you're going to pay me and what, to advances. So, I have now gotten an agent, Meenakshi, who does all of this. So I'm still owed money. Let me just make that clear. I'm still owed money, and we're still sending first reminder, second reminder, third. Next will be slight, I need to speak to my legal, that sort of thing. But my agent is handling it. So that's why I don't need to stress about it. But there was a time when I would find it humiliating, to have to call and ask to be paid for work that you've done on your own, especially because I come from a background where a salaried class, where you get your money at the beginning of every month, and you work through the month. So for me, it was sort of very, very difficult, and that's why I always tell writers, that there are ways to get around this, and it's important that you choose these ways, because even the contracts, right? These agents have legal teams who will vet these contracts so that you don't get caught up in legalese and get squeezed out of your credit or anything like that. So I'm a bit of an activist sort of writer. I don't know that means I'll get less work, but so be it.
No. I don't believe
I want to share these things with new writers, with young writers, with people from the writing community, because I think it's important that they know these things, and everything is not like, all stars and glitz and glamour. No, it's tough. Yeah.
And it's also to also know what is fair pay to you, right? Not every writer would know that. And often people get shortchanged. So to be able to know what's the going rate and what you deserve is something that an agent can definitely help you with.
That's really a good message from both of you for our new script writers, the young generation who just
also, make sure that you register your work, because copyright is a big thing. So you may share something in good faith, and someone can, there's no copyright for an idea. Someone can pick up an idea from your work and then go ahead and make a whole film out of it, and you're just left saying, hey, wait a minute, that looks familiar. So be sure to register your work. You can on the Screenwriters Association website.
Right, great. So I believe the people are taking note of this, and actually now things are changing, but plagiarism is something that is difficult, and we also face it.
These are the realities of the business. So I think you have to be aware of these. Don't go in there with your because it's a very glamorous business, right? And everything looks so good, and it's also high profile. And you can be overwhelmed by personalities. Sure, I mean, if you're working with if you meet Amitabh Bachchan, I think all of us would be overwhelmed.
Definitely, definitely. Even now,
your interests have to be protected.
Definitely, true there. So I believe everybody's taken note of this, and thank you for this. So Parinda, talking on a different perspective, can you share your views about how difficult it is for women writers to be taken seriously in India and abroad? And Adwaita, if you want to add something to it, you are also most welcome. So Parinda, can you please share your views first?
Yeah, I think things definitely are changing. There's parts of the world are making great progress on making it a more equal environment for all of us. And over the past few years, you'll see a lot more women writers now around on the block, whether it's in the US or in India. Some of them are my favorite. I root for women writers a lot. The perception still remain, right? So an example that I just gave you, when I'd written Made in China, that maybe if you're a young, good-looking, quote-unquote writer, then you should stick to romances because that's what will sell. So there's this whole notion of what is sellable when it comes to a woman author. There's also the perception of Men don't read books written by women. At least that used to be the case, unless it's a serious kind of novel, unless it's literary fiction. Commercial fiction has a much harder time for women writers to get male readers, and so if your universe of readers is going to be cut into half by just women authors, then there's ideas that publishing houses will try to impose upon you on what kind of themes should you be writing on, and a lot of it usually revolves around relationships and romances, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I don't like to confine myself to just one genre, right? So while I might have experimented with it, I'm more free flowing in that I'm not trying to build a reader base. I'm trying to write stories that I want to tell. And sometimes they're across genres, and they may not be female authors in that genre or enough of us, and that's okay. I'm not looking to be successful or break out in a certain genre. I'm just writing, trying to write stories that I want to write or tell. So there is a little bit of struggle. I also wanted to put it out there that just because you published once or twice, even by eminent publishing houses, there's no guarantees that you will continue to get published. Every work will be evaluated not just on the basis of its merit, but also what fits the publishing schedule of that publisher at that point in time. And so it's a struggle every step of the way, right? It's not a bed of roses, as Adwaita said, whether it's publishing or the movies. Nothing's a guarantee, and I don't take it for granted. So when you're every time feels like the first time, the struggles are there. Yes, you're a little bit more of a more well-known name probably by the next time your book releases or your movie releases, but you still have to prove your worth, and your work still has to speak for you, and it still has to fit a lot of other things. So I think those things still remain for men as for women, but then women used to have a little bit harder. I feel like I don't have statistics, but I feel like I see far more books from publishing houses by women than used to be in the 5 years back, 7 years back. So when I track new releases by a publisher, is about 20 a month, I see at least a good majority of them by women authors. So I feel like they're being published a lot more. They're also writing across genres. They're bringing a lot of unique voices to it, and they're finding male audiences too. They're being recognized for their work. So I feel like we're making a lot of progress, but I don't have the statistics. Maybe Adwaita can add to it.
That's really heartening. And Adwaita, you have something to say for that?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I remember when I wrote my first book, Almost Single. I live in Delhi, and Delhi has a lot of book parties, right? And they were quite the scene. About, at least for me 10 years ago. You know how it is. It's a whole new world. You're stunned that you're being published because you don't know anybody in publishing. And I was what they call a blind submission. Basically, somebody who walks off the street and leaves their envelope with their manuscript on the receptionist table. You don't even get beyond the receptionist. So that was literally who I was. So suddenly I got this publishing deal with no advance, which I should have asked for, but like I've already mentioned, we live, we learn. So I was just so happy to be published. And then, I used to work in hotels at that point of time, and the book was going to be coming out in a couple of months. My editor, like I said, Nandita, worked very well with her. And she kind of, started sending me these invites to these book parties. And these book parties used to be in fancy hotels, and, the creme de la creme of Delhi used to be there, the intellectual creme de la creme. And it was very fun to go to. I used to love going to them at that time. Now I don't go to any. But at that point of time, there was a novelty to it. And I remember going to one, and, I'm going straight from work. And as a hotel employee, I used to dress in a certain way. You wear the suit and you have this professional veneer. And I went to one, and I remember there was this young male writer who was slightly older than me, but had just returned from the West, Indian origin, sort of relocated, and had this great first book, which was very high literary value, and everybody was loving him. And this is the time when only Chetan had his book out, right? And that was sort of the gentrification of commercial fiction in India was starting. It hadn't quite happened as yet, because Chetan was oh, he can't write English and those typical kind of snooty put downs for him. So only Chetan's book was out. This was pre-Amish and all of that. And I had my book in line to be released. And this guy was sort of, my editor went up to him with me and introduced me and said that, oh, this is Advaita and we're publishing her. So suddenly his expression changed. He started engaging with me that, oh, you're a writer as well. And it was very nice. I felt like I had arrived in a sense because, the first time you write and somebody calls you a writer, it's surreal. Because especially for me, because I was always writing, but suddenly you have a publishing deal and you'll actually have a book out and people call you a writer. It's lovely. So I was sort of relishing that moment and that recognition of being a writer. And then he says, "What have you written?" So before I could answer, my my editor said, "Oh, she's written Chicklet. She's our first Chicklet writer." And his expression changed, right? I went suddenly from being a writer to being like nobody. So I never even heard of Chicklet because I mean, this is a whole new world. So I go home and I Google, thank God for Google, and Chicklet and, all the usual stuff came out, and most of it negative. So I'm like, oh my God. So I'm just like this Chicklet writer. I'm nobody. And I realized that this perspective was that I went from being a writer to not being a writer just because of the genre of the book. And what was the genre of the book? It was a book that was written in a humorous tone, which appealed to female writers, which wasn't apologetic about appealing to female writers. And let me just say the statistics, more women read fiction than men. So guess what? Your odds as a female writer are really good. Definitely. So, I didn't know all these things then. So you can imagine, I felt almost like insulted. And then the book came out, and the book was this success. And so I was crowned for a bit Chicklet Queen. Then I kind of suffered under that crown because then nobody takes you seriously, right? Because that's all you're capable of is like the fluffy little story and do another one, sell a couple of, the publishers love you because you're selling lots of copies, but nobody gives you any heft, there's no respect. And every artist, wants a certain modicum of respect. So that didn't happen for the longest time, for 4 or 5 years, till I wrote Kahani. And then then suddenly, after that, then I became the feminist writer. So I went from Chicklet to like feminist. And there were like these theses and things like that written on the feminist undertones of the film Kahani and this and that. And I said, wow, one work can just change who you are from one extreme to the other. And that was my big lesson, was like, don't take these labels seriously because they're so superficial, In a matter of a few years, you can just go from Chicklet to feminist.
Yeah. You are what your last performance called you.
It's the same person, so no labels. That's the big story.
Right.
Whatever gender you are.
Right. In fact,
just to add to that quickly, I feel like we've done away with the phrase Chicklet now just because I don't think there's anything wrong with it. Women loved it. I have a ton of, Chicklet books in my, quote unquote, Chicklet books in my collection. But I feel like the world has transitioned now and done away with that term and calling it women's fiction. And if there's fiction that's not just fluff, but has a little bit of, character development and plot and depth, then they call it upmarket women's fiction. But I feel like at least it's an effort to make the genre more respectable.
Yeah, and I'm glad they've done that because I think it's sort of they don't say that about men. I mean, I said this at the Nepal Lit Fest, when they asked me about Chicklet, and I said, do they refer to men's book as Dicklet? I mean, what is the point here? I mean, why would you categorize a book based on a genre? I mean, based on a gender, really. It doesn't make any sense at all to do that. So it's great that they moved on. And you're absolutely right, Parinda. There's so many men who read these books. And I asked some men, I said, why do you read these so-called Chicklet books and all of that? And they said that it's because we want to understand how women think. And I said, there you go. I said, because our society has on some level, this sort of segregation between the male experience and the female experience. So there is a great curiosity amongst men about the female experience. And
But
you
a
know,
man
you never
would
know how
not.
to work.
Yeah,
Huh?
but a man would not be caught dead with a chiclet in his hand in
Well,
public.
I had this great story about this friend who worked in a real high-powered job. So you know how it is with your first book, you want each and every friend to read it and to own it. So you know you harass the life out of your relatives, your friends, like buy it, buy it, buy it. And I forced him to buy it. So he finally had like he had the lifestyle. He's lunch here, dinner there, high-powered business meetings, all of that, no time for anything. So at the airport, he saw the book. So he picked it up. And then he got onto the flight and he started reading it and he enjoyed it because I mean he knows me, he knows my sense of humor, he kind of related to it, kept reading it, got into the taxi, went on reading it, evidently didn't have motion sickness, got to the finally got to his meeting. He was going in for a meeting and then taking a flight back, walked into that boardroom with this book and his laptop case and placed them both on the table. And this is he's going to negotiate. And someone looked at the book, and by then it would become sort of well known. And they said, "Are you reading Chiclet?" So he got on the phone with me after the meeting and he says, "Why the hell didn't you tell me this was Chiclet?" I said, "Doesn't matter." And he's like, "No, but I wouldn't have kind of put it on that meeting table." So,
Oh
so
my
yeah, I
God.
think men do get self-conscious, but they do read.
Yeah, they are actually more conscious than women, come to
Yeah.
think of it. So, moving on. All right. So, this was really fun. This I did not know this question would actually get out so much from both of you. This was really fun. So, coming to a more personal aspect of your lives, both of you are working professionals in different domains apart from being professional writers. So, how do you manage to juggle your work, your writing, and your personal lives? So, both of you, can you just share your views, your experiences?
Yeah, I can go first. I think there's the challenge with having it all or juggling so many balls is obviously time, it's focus, it's commitment. There's only so many hours in a day. And at the end of the day, you have to prioritize, right? As Michelle Obama said once, that women can have it all, just not all at once. And that's okay, right? So as long as you're not killing yourself over it, I think that's something Bukowski said too, that, find what you love and let it kill you. I modify that to find what you love, but don't kill yourself over it, right? I try not to stress myself. I know writing is so fun. There is this commitment, which is why it takes me a very long time to write my books. Every book has taken me upwards of 2 years, and that's okay. I know that there is a 9 to 5 that I love, that I'm committed to, and there's just something else, which is my love, it's my passion, it's my escape. And I don't have to try too hard to come back to writing because I can't stay away from it for too long. It just brings me unprecedented joy. And so and I don't try to follow, I get a lot of these questions of what's the best time of the day to write, or what's your schedule like. I don't have a schedule. The thing with having juggling two careers is, at the end of the day, when you're done with your work and you've taken your kid to the music class and come back and cooked and had dinner, you can't just flip the switch and start writing, right? That's the thing with any creative endeavor. It's you can't just turn it on. You can't just summon the muse. There has to be you have to be in a certain mind space. There has to be a certain mood around you. And so as long as you're not, putting impossible standards on yourself, saying, I'm going to write 1,000 words a day. I hear a lot of that. And you're fine, right? You'll get to it when you get to it, as long as there is that commitment and there is that love for it. So it also depends on what your, if you have the luxury of being a part-time writer. I do. And so if I don't have those crazy deadlines, I can kind of sort of chart my own schedules. And it does get busy once in a while, right? When it's close to getting published and, you're doing the editorial bits and the loops, and it's constant, and it's challenging, but it's for the short period of time, and you just kind of do those little adjustments. Having an understanding family is obviously very important, because it is everything that you do is time away from your other parts of life, right? And it's what you choose to. So it's ultimately, it's just the balance that you need to create for your own self. It's about writing your own happiness equation and do what makes you happy. It doesn't have to be all at once. That's
I
just my
believe
sense.
that equation keeps evolving also, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Exactly. Right. And Adwaita, please.
I mean, my sister is also a writer, Girvani Dhyani. She's published a book, Stalked, and we just worked on a screenplay together. So she has a 2-year-old, right? And when we were working on the screenplay together, she would set her alarm for like 4 a.m. and write and send it to me. And then here's me. It sits on my in the inbox for an hour, for 2 hours, for 3 hours. So I think somewhere in a sense, because she had a child, she was far more disciplined because she said, I have to kind of, get to this and I have to get this done. And because I don't, except for a Shih Tzu, and that if he qualifies, he often does for a child. In my mind, you just take your time with things. So I think for me, really, uh, there isn't. I write is what I do. I mean, that's who I am. That's what I do. For me, there isn't like another thing. There isn't another gig. It may be a column today. It may be a web series. It may be whatever it is. But this is my world, and COVID people, and I'm a bit of what I describe myself as an introverted extrovert, if that makes sense, because I'm very extroverted in interactions and I love to meet people, but not too often. I prefer my home. So COVID for me was great because usually when there are invites, I have to kind of find excuses to decline. But with COVID, it was so simple because I could just say, "Oh, can't come out. I'm home." I love to be at home, and that was for me liberating because I didn't come off as rude or off-putting by just being who I need to be. So yeah, so I think for me, really just having my space, I think it's very important for me to have certain peace of mind so I can focus on the work at hand, because I usually do multiple things also at one time. And that's very important for me to do that because I have different interests. And I like to have different interests because that also means that I'm not too invested in one thing. And I learned this with my film Anjana Anjani. It released on the same day that Kahani started shooting. And Anjana Anjani, when films release, there are like 300 reviews in a day. It's crazy. And this was a big movie, Priyanka, Ranbir, blah, blah, all of that. And there's a lot of the reviews were not good. So I was, first film and these reviews are not good. And what am I going to do? And it always works this way, right? You only focus on the negative, not on the positive. So the good reviews I ignored. The negative reviews I really zeroed in on. Till someone knocked on my door and said that, look, Kahani, there's a set. Maybe you should head over there. So that was a great lesson because I said, if I did not have that Kahani set to go to and get engaged and feel hopeful about this film, and I had just stayed on with those negative reviews that were swirling in my head, I would never do anything else. So I really feel that you should have more than one ball up in the air. Here's my child.
He's come for attention. What's his name?
He has a very desi name. He's called Jimmy.
Oh, so give a hug from my side to Jimmy, please.
My pug is called Pushkin. So I went with one very literary name and one like roadside Romeo name, right?
That makes it very good.
But that's a good point, right? That we often, there's a tendency to wallow in self-pity when we hear all those brickbats. And there's bouquets and the brickbats, and there's a lot to learn from the brickbats too. If you focus on the right ones and just take it with a pinch of salt and run with it, rather than just over-index on it, which initially, early on with your first few works, you tend to do.
Yeah.
And then you learn.
It's very personal, right? Because it's such a process.
Correct. Yeah. It's like a baby. It really hurts.
But social media has made me stronger because I'm on Twitter and I'm active and I get trolled a lot. So it's been good training. Now I think I'm like made of titanium. Like anyone could say anything and I would just brush it off.
Twitter gives us
it's
just
worse for us academic writers. Students come in your class and say, "Hey, you have got errors in your book." And I'm like, errors do creep in. What can you do?
Yeah.
I'm also human. So that happens so much. And but then one gets used to it. And you're like, okay, fine, tell me the error. I'll get it corrected. Thank you very much. So that's all. So all right. So Parinda, coming to you, your genre is quirky, as you said yourself. And I've also realized it reading your books, amusing, and it has a lot of interplay of emotions, which I definitely noticed in your latest book. I went through it and I loved a lot of parts of it. So, can you talk about how you do evolve this into your style of writing, or was it just a natural process?
Well, I think so. Growing up, my father has a wonderful, delightful sense of humor, and it was all fun and games. He never took himself seriously, and I think I've inherited that gene from him. So I don't take myself too seriously. I'm always messing around with people, joking about things. Not everybody takes to it kindly, but that's okay. I also have a voracious appetite for humor, for entertainment. In LA, I used to be a regular at comedy clubs. I consume a lot of that content through books, through TV shows. It's just something I thrive on, and quirks are something that I notice I have a tendency to pick up on people. So I used to be a huge people watcher back in the day, pre-pandemic. So you'd find me at coffee shops or in malls, just not eavesdropping, but I had a knack for picking out on conversations around me or traits of people that were quirky. I grew up reading a lot of Woodhouse, and I loved his biting sense of humor and the delightful wit and sarcasm. And that just spoke to me, and I was like, wow, maybe one day I could write like that. So it's just something that I had a natural affinity towards. And I think I part of it I inherited, part of it I developed, and it's just something. So even when it comes to serious topics, right? I'm not a very controversial person, and so my tendency is to wrap a controversial opinion or a tough opinion, lace it up with humor, and serve it with a side of humor. And I think that just becomes a little more palatable. And that's something I end up following in real life, and that's something that has seeped into my books as well. And it just comes naturally to me. I love characters that have a quirky, amusing side to them. I love the witty banters between my characters. A lot of my dialogue is snappy and sharp, and has that fun element to it, even when it's deeply emotional. So when I used to go to here's something interesting. When I started going to writers group, I used to be a regular at the Berkeley Writers Group, where everybody was writing something that was madcap. And I got this feedback that yes, my books are fun and froth, but but the deep emotion is missing. And then I realized with my second book that I'm not a very emotional person. When things happen, I tend to move on quickly, right? I don't let it linger. I don't lament over my losses. It's just my personality. But that doesn't bode very well for your writing, because if your characters are moving from just strength to strength without sufficiently, uh, allowing themselves to wallow in what has just happened or transpired, then you're not really digging deep. So that's an exercise I've done personally over the past many years, just digging deep into myself. And I realize I'm more emotional than I gave myself credit for. And so that's something that is a personal feat that I've been able to manifest with my new novel, where it's there's depth but there's levity, right? There's a girl who's going through a lot at home in a house full of men, and it's from the surface of it, it's a lighthearted, fun novel, but there's a lot of emotional depths and arcs to it.
Definitely, I did notice that, and that was the beauty of the book, I believe. So one of the beauties, it had many great things. So coming to you, Advaita, I have noticed again a lot of passion in your writing, and I'll not use the word feminism because we are all women out here. So passion is something I noticed in your writing, and even in your interviews. I stalked both of you. I mean, and I'm confessing before this because I had to know about you as people and make it more personalized. So yeah. So in your interviews, I noticed a kind of a message that you try to give for the people, especially the youth. I may be wrong, but then I did kind of notice that. And even the storyline of the movie Kahani. I mean, there were some images, there were some dialogues or some moments which did not get erased. It's been almost 10 years, I believe. And but still, there are some moments that are still etched on my mind. And so can you share how you go about, thinking about it, or would you like to say something about that?
I don't know if there is a process as such, or if it's just it comes to you, when you're in the midst, or when you're immersed. Writing can be a very immersive experience when it's going well. When it's not going well, it can be just something that is like a clock ticking, and there's a deadline somewhere, and you just have to get to it, and you can't do anything till you get to it, and then you can live your life. But when it's going well, it's a really immersive process. So I think Kahani was one of those experiences where the writing really flowed. And I sat down and wrote and wrote and wrote and wrote all day long. So that was for me. I always gauge these things by what the process is like for me as a writer. How enjoyable is it. And that did happen with Kahani. In terms of the messaging, I firmly believe that books, films, they should entertain. They're not about me peddling my own politics or my agenda or any of those things. Sure, can they are there some values which I hold on to? Like, I don't like item songs, for example, because of the way they objectify women, and the lyrics, like those that chicken tikka song, tandoori chicken, or whatever, that disgusting song, that really gets my goat. I just don't like songs like that, especially when I see little children dancing to those lyrics and things, where complete commodification of women. So those are the things that, so I think I'm more guided by values than necessarily politics, or trying to give a message or a moral story. Those things don't really bother me. I'd be happy to write a film with no message. And it's just a laugh riot, no problem. And in the interviews, since those are personal exchanges, I certainly don't think of myself as a role model, but definitely somebody whose experiences now, since I've been part of this business for some length of time, can be of help to other people. And if someone's spending their time, like, I value time, and if someone's spending their time listening to me, then there has to be some takeaway from that conversation, wherein they say, okay, so now, like from this conversation, I hope people walked away saying, okay, I've got to be smart about who I share my work with, and what I get paid, and how and when I get paid. And if writers, young writers who are starting out, take away that from this conversation, for me, it's time well spent here, because we can all keep talking about ourselves.
Yeah.
That's the easiest thing in the world to do.
Correct.
Yeah.
So I think we are running out of time. My last question to the both of you, I'll I'll be wicked and combine two questions and pose it for you. So the two important questions that I wanted to ask. The pandemic has been a difficult time for all of us. So what were your personal experiences with it? How did you cope, and what happened during that time? Do we expect some stories about it from both of you? And also, anything that you would want to say to our audience, to the young script writers, to your viewers, to your readers, whatever you would want to say in a personal capacity. So please share that with us. Yeah, Parinda, please.
Sure. Yes, as you said, it's been a very difficult time. A lot of us have lost, extended family members, friends. I personally have experienced a lot of loss, and it's been a lot of it has been a very dark time. And it's obviously given us a lot of perspective on life, that life is fleeting, that I've become a lot more conscious about practicing gratitude now. So just a lot of learnings about life in general, just being appreciative of things, not to take anything for granted, and all of those great lessons that we've all learned along the way. I am quite an extrovert, so it's been hard for me just staying cooped up and working from home. I'm glad the world is getting back to some sort of normalcy. The one positive thing that I did for myself on the work front was, when we knew we had started, we were going to work from home for a while, and that I was going to save about 3 hours a day. I remember in March last year, me and a director friend of mine, we decided to write a screenplay. It was around March, and now we're finished it. It's gone through multiple edits now, done with the dialogues. and now it's commissioned, and we're now in the what's it called, the
Pre-production.
Pre-production. Yes. So we're in the pre-production phase now, just finalizing actors, and so it's come a really long way, and I'm so glad that I have something to show for all that extra time I saved by not commuting.
Great, we have this to look forward to then.
Casting is what I was going for. Sorry, we're in the casting phases right now. And
your message. I mean, whatever you want to say to the people who are out there listening to you. Not really a message, whatever you want. Yeah.
So to young writers, I would say that follow your dreams, follow your passion, make sure you're working for it, go out and learn as much as you can, be a voracious reader, interact with other authors as much as you can, be a part of writing groups. As we live in a world now where there's more resources available than ever before. I keep doing myself, I'm taking a masterclass by Aaron Sorkin right now and just loving it every step of the way. So do what you can to educate yourself and go out and have fun.
Great. And Adwaita, your turn, please.
My message for young writers is don't quit your day job. I meet far too many people who want to write and they say, I just want to quit and sit at home and write all the time. And I said, please don't do that. I waited. When I'm a full-time writer now, I waited till Almost Single was published, till it was picked up by an international publisher. Then it sold its copies. Then I got a film. Then I got another film. And that film did really well. I won awards and then I quit. Okay. So I went through that whole journey before I quit. I didn't say I want to be a writer and quit my day job. No, please don't do that. Please continue to work. Nothing romantic about being a starving writer. Trust me, there's no fun in it. So please continue to work. Find your time in your day, on your weekend, which you can put to your writing, which you can share, which you can don't need to share with anybody else. So if you have a family, like my sister does, wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning. I know it's tough, but people find a way, right? So please do that. That's my biggest advice to anyone who's starting out, is really just focus on that.
And your pandemic experience, and do we expect something coming from you?
No, I think my pandemic experience has frankly been very traumatic because I've lost some people who are very dear to me. One of them, of course, was a friend of mine from publishing, Yogesh Sharma, who was with Bloomsbury now. But he was at HarperCollins when I first got published, and he was in charge of the sales of my book, and was somebody that I've been associated with right from the beginning of my writing journey. And the last time we spoke was in the month of March, where I shared an idea with him, and he sort of took a look at it, and he said, okay, this is a good idea. Then I shared another manuscript with him, because like I said, I work on multiple things. So I have things just lying in the drawer, which I'll probably never do anything with unless I feel they're good enough to be out in the world. So I shared that manuscript with him and he gave me feedback. And then I had another idea. He was the guy that I would call up with an idea. Like, I have an idea, and he would hear me out, and then I'd forget about the idea. And then I call him 2 weeks later and say, I have an idea. He was that guy. And he told me that, oh, come on, but you've got to finish it now. So I said, all right. I said, I'm only going to call you once I finish writing. And in the month of March, this was, and in the month of April, we were not in touch. He got sick in April with COVID. And then I think around the first week of May, he died. And I never actually got to speak to him. And for me, I shelved one book instantly because that was the book that I wanted to do with him. So I was like, I'm not doing that. So I think it really hurt me. It tore me apart. And the last time I spoke to him, his kid was kind of just starting to walk and was pulling at his phone. So he had to go, our conversation ended like that because his son came and had just started walking. And I mean, just young people with their whole lives ahead of them, so much to contribute, just gone, So I'm not able to make sense of it enough to be able to write about COVID as an atmospheric thing. No, I think it's too potent and real for me to use it as a set for something. No, not at all. Can't do that. And I don't like China.
I guess many of us agree with that.
Yeah.
So yeah, the COVID was actually a difficult time. Personally, I believe all of us lost somebody somewhere, and it's been really sad. But then we do move on, and time to move on from this also. But it was really heartening to have both of you, and I'm really grateful on behalf of Lucknow Expression Society and the Metaphor Lucknow Literature Festival to have both of you on board, and it was lovely talking to you, and we'll definitely keep in touch.
Thank you so much,
Thank you.
Sakshi.
Thank you for being a great host. Bye, Advita.
Bye. Have a good day,
Bye.
Parinda. Your day's just started.
Yes.
Bye.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Take care.
Thank you
both
for
of
the
you.
chat.
God bless. God bless. Bye-bye.